Welcome back to The Real Story with Jeannie Ives. Today we're going to get very local in our discussion. We're going to talk with Bill Graham. He is a resident of Glen Ellen, and he has been following what his school board has been up to, specifically Community Consolidated School District 89. It's an elementary school district. It has about 5 schools, 1 middle school, 4 that are pre-K through 5th grade. So, Bill, welcome to the program. Thank you for being with me on The Real Story.
Great, Jeannie. Thanks for having me.
Yes. So we got started talking about the issues in D89 over a referendum that they are running next week, as a matter of fact. It's on the June ballot here in the state of Illinois. And, of course, they're picking a primary election because a lot of people don't show up in a primary election, just like they don't show up in those off-year elections. And that's when they'd like to elect their school board members, too. So they're putting together a referendum, and this referendum, which is something that I am very much interested in, is about for $27 million, right? And it seems to me now, are they building a new school with $27 million?
No.
Are they making major improvements or adding on to a school with $27 million?
I think one of the add-ons is that one of the elementary schools, they're adding a second gymnasium.
Okay.
But most of the money is dedicated to be spent on systems like heating systems and air conditioning and roofing, paving, concrete, infrastructure around the various schools. And it differs, from campus to campus is how much each one of these really needs to have done. But there won't be a big difference in how anybody sees the schools, and it won't change the capacity of the schools. In fact, right now they're running under capacity.
Okay, so they actually, and I think one of the things that we looked into, or at least you looked into, was enrollment. So they've got these improvements. They've got to maintain their buildings. It sounds like a lot of what they've put into this referendum project is maintenance costs for the most part. And it's an easy thing to do, to defer maintenance, to not even set aside money in every single budget for big maintenance projects like a new roof, like paving a new parking lot, like putting in new heating and cooling systems. And did they just not save money through the years for it? And now they're just thinking they can roll a referendum?
I think it's reasonable for residents to ask the question when you have a home in the district and you need to keep it in decent shape. You'll coat seal the driveway, you'll fix the porch, you'll do a variety of things out of your operating funds or income. Only when you're getting to something really material like adding another floor or a swimming pool will you go and borrow some money, say equity loan. So I think it's a good question residents could ask. Why is it that all these things have to get done like in 2 years, when many of them possibly could have been done over the last several years or could be spread out over the next several years? None of it appears to be an emergency, although they are trying to make it out like it is.
Okay, well, that's a really good question. Did a roof cave in? Did they have a major leak?
There were some minor leaks that were tended to, and now they're looking at doing more of a repair of an old roofing system.
Okay.
I don't really object personally to, I'm an engineer, so I don't object personally to maintaining property. I question the way this was done, and I'm concerned because there seems to be a lack of honesty and transparency in how they've come to the residents and said, we need this money right now. It's really important. They never told anybody about the interest costs, and they still refuse to mention how much interest expense there will be. We think it'll be around an additional $10 million, but it could be higher as the bond issue rates go up over the next several months. And, there was a comment last night from a resident saying, why are you buying all this stuff right away now when we have terrible inflation? All your projects are going to cost far more than you thought they were going to cost. So that's another valid. So residents have a right to ask.
Let's go back to that. You didn't come up with the $10 million interest charge on your own. By the way, on $27 million, a $10 million interest cost is 37% of the overall, in addition to the cost. It's a huge amount.
It's a lot. I confirmed it with Maureen, who's the assistant superintendent for financial matters, and she said, yeah, it's probably about that.
But then she backed away. She didn't want to make a public statement.
Once she got in a public meeting, that wasn't a phone call I had with her. She admitted that it was about $10 million, but once we got in a public meeting, she really backed away from it. And I couldn't get any we're pressing them in a public meeting, but we couldn't get any clear answer from them about the interest or the bond closing costs. They really don't want us to know that, and they haven't put it in there. And the other big thing that I think is unfortunate is they were chartered by the board with putting together a program that solves the problem but reduces taxes. So they came up with a scenario that they say saves $4 a year per house on taxes. But they have decided not to let you know that if we did nothing, every home would save $300 a year on taxes because a bond is coming to maturity this year.
Well, that's why they're doing it this year. Bill, that's why they are doing this referendum this year, because they have a bond that's maturing. It's coming off of the tax rolls. Property tax owners will see, hundreds of dollars of savings every year. So now they're just selling it to the public as you won't see a tax increase. But the truth is you would see a massive tax decrease if they weren't taking out this bonding right now, if they had done their due diligence by putting aside enough for maintenance projects that they knew would be coming due. Because there's a schedule to do it. And by the way, you're an engineer. There's something called the Sherman-Durgis maintenance scheduling. And I know my home district ran into this problem. They adopted a Sherman-Durgis type of formula in order to determine what their maintenance costs are going to be over time. And then they budget for that every single year, putting it aside. Now, I'm not one for school districts also like hoarding a bunch of money for projects they think are going to happen, but there is a systematic way that they should be saving for these major projects.
Right, and these are what other public homeowners associations do this
That's
in
right.
this matter, so they don't have to go back to the homeowner and say we're going to change the rate, the forest preserve. Oftentimes you'll see improvements at a forest preserve and you never voted on them. That's because it's normally part of their maintenance and preventive maintenance and repair. So yes, this is unfortunate, and my concern is for honesty and transparency. I believe they should have told everybody, even before they surveyed people about what was needed. They should have told every homeowner that was in the survey that you would save $300 a year if you didn't pass this referendum. They never did that, and to this day they haven't told it to anybody.
Well, the other thing that they like to do is they like to, since they're running a referendum, they like to pile on all sorts of other stuff that may not be necessary, but they wanted in the long term, so they'll just put it all together. So in this case, you said that there was a survey done, and the district actually came out with 3 different numbers that they were willing to bond for to get projects done. And one was, I think, $13 million, one was $20 million, one was $27 million from the notes that you gave me.
Right. And
they surveyed the residents, and 64% of those surveyed wanted a lower number than $27 million. And yet that's the number that they went with? Is that what happened?
Yes. A lower number, including zero, is part of the 64%. Yeah.
Okay.
So they think their answer was a mandate. I don't think so. And, if those numbers are accurate reflection of the community, guess what? The election that's up this week, you can vote today on this referendum. They may find that it didn't get passed.
Yeah.
If those numbers are valid, I don't know. But the turnout is so low. My concern is that a great majority of the people voting on this referendum will be teachers or parents of students in these particular schools, and the average resident isn't going to even vote.
Well, I tell you what, I think what voters should do and what taxpayers should understand is that the school district needs to take it out of hide. They need to find this money, because I listened, and it was painful. But I listened to most of that school board meeting last night, and it was painful because your superintendent in D89 is arrogant and condescending to the board members and the public that was present. Condescending. And so it was really hard to listen to this, but they were giving the financial reports, and every time the financial officer was saying, we're over budget on this, we're over budget on this, meaning their revenues were over what they estimated they would getting. They got more in revenues than they expected according to their budget. And so they could maybe take a bite at this a little bit at a time instead of doing a massive referendum. I think they need to take it out of hide. But that's me. So moving on, you went to the board meeting last night.
Right.
Okay. There were quite a few speakers. There were a couple other controversial topics.
Right.
And as the referendum had been covered in other board meetings, the other controversial topics are the ones that probably got more notice from the audience. So one of them was this idea that they're going to change their pandemic preparedness policy. And to summarize, they were basically had a policy that was passed sometime, I believe, in December of 2020 or December of 2021, that essentially said that if you're going to make a decision that says that the schools are going to be shut down, that we're going to go to remote learning, the kids are going to mask, in the event of an emergency declaration for a pandemic, it was specific to that, then the policy would be that the board may convene, that the superintendent and the board president may make a decision on their own. They may, right?
That's the proposal.
That's the proposal, is that they may make the decision on their own.
But the current language says the board shall.
Yeah, the current language says that the board shall make the decision entirely. And now they want to basically give board control to just 2 people.
That's the proposal.
That is the proposal. And so there was quite a bit of controversy over this. I have a clip. I want us to put on our headphones so we can listen to the clip, and we'll be making comments as we hear this clip. I'll tell you what I want listeners to pick up on is the fact of what other board members are saying, and the condescension that you hear in the superintendent as she tries to go through this. So, JP, if you could play the clip, that'd be great.
So,
okay, and the first
Steve,
person you're
mentioned that
hearing
we would
here
have to have
is
a
one of the
meeting,
board
because
members
I don't see
describing the
anywhere here
policy.
where we would have to have a meeting.
Well, the 7 of you can't make a decision in
So
last
that's
year.
where the shall.
Right, that's where
Yeah, the shall would
force
require
the
a meeting. You got it.
No, it's not stated in here.
Correct.
Okay.
'Cause
Correct.
You can't do board business outside of a meeting.
board meeting.
Okay. So I think the concern there is that we would be vesting, full authority into board president and yourself to make a decision without us, whereas shall would make it part of the policy that you review board policy development and consult with us
Yep.
in an
Yep.
official meeting.
Yep, real clip there.
I do think it is worthwhile to table it and have everybody join in, because it's a very subtle nuance, but
Yeah, I think it takes a step, I'm sorry, I didn't want to join it. I think it takes a step too far in putting the board in.
This is board
Running
member
the
Jay
district.
Lurch.
I mean,
Listen
that's
to
what
his
we hire the
comments.
superintendent for, is to run the district. The board sets policy like this, and then we trust the administration and the superintendent in charge of that administration to kind of run it. I don't really want to get in the weeds of the day-to-day, running, if we start here, is it going to go to, which kind of books are we deciding need to go in the classroom? Which kind of colors do we decide has to go on the walls? What kind of posters? That kind of thing. I don't want to insert the board more into the running of the district, because that's what we,
He's
that's
making
what
a
we hired the
slippery
superintendent to
slope
do.
argument that makes no sense at all.
And this is a press policy, so this is used by everybody that subscribes to press, right? I mean, so it's the same for all of the other districts. I can't imagine that they would, send something out that would possibly have somebody liable for,
Okay,
open to
hold
a
right there,
lawsuit
JP, for
in the
comment.
policies. So I'm kind of for leaving it the way it is.
Okay, so this guy is making the allegation that it's a policy that's going to be adopted by a lot of different school districts. Well, first of all, that is not true. That is not true, even though some school districts did do this during the pandemic, ceded all control to the superintendent. It's not true that most of them did, and it doesn't matter. Everybody's jumping off a bridge, you're going to too. Everybody's ceding their control to 1 or 2 people. You think your board should do that too when they're all duly elected? I mean, and then the nonsense, so now the board's going to decide the color of the rooms. I don't know, Bill, what was the tenor when you were listening to this? What was the feeling in the audience as people listened to these folks?
Well, I can only tell of those who got up to say something, and there were a couple, but at least the comments they made were, outrage. One gentleman got up and he says, if you're going to delegate away your authority, then you should resign. That's all I have to say. And, I got up and said that the board delegating this authority away is something the people that elected them to do, to those positions, that we did not want them to do that. We don't want board members to delegate away their authority to someone else unless there's some overwhelming critical reason for it, which there almost never is.
Right. So, and then also they intentionally misinterpret school board member Donna Kemp's comments, because she's the one who started this argument. And I didn't bring those in because it would have been too long. But she's the one who brought up the fact that a lot of school districts got it wrong, and there were legal ramifications from that. And the Tom DeVore lawsuits prove that up. And we don't want to put ourselves in legal jeopardy. And this guy tried to poo-poo that fact. And by the way, one of the other board members there is wearing a mask the whole time. And he's saying, well, I can't imagine that we would ever take a radical step like actually making a decision on our own. He was the board president. He goes, I can't imagine because, I can't, it'd have to be a lot worse than what we just went through with this pandemic. And yet this is a guy wearing a mask. So he obviously is still thinking that this pandemic is really serious stuff. I mean, I honestly don't understand it. To me, it's nonsense. But yeah, no, I wouldn't trust you. I wouldn't trust you at the drop of the hat to make an independent decision for whatever. So we're going to continue on with this clip because I want you to hear how the superintendent responds and note how she, first of all, tries to justify the fact that she would never do this. And then she goes on to say that she thinks she needs this authority. Go ahead.
I would much rather have the decision fall with the board than just on me.
This is the superintendent speaking.
That's why I brought the decision to you every time. I will tell you what scares me about this. It's a real slippery slope to all of us getting on the phone at 2 a.m. for snow days.
For snow days.
It's a real
for
slippery
snow
slope
days.
when there's a massive flood on April 17th, April 26th, 2008, and we have,
It's all fun.
It's just that's more where when I look at I'll be real honest. I don't want to make the decisions in a vacuum about opening or closing schools as it relates to COVID or the next pandemic or whatever it is. It's always going to be at a board table, and every decision I have made and every action I have taken on past practice has indicated that I come to the table and have those conversations in an open meeting with the public there over numerous times. So there is not one thing in my behavior that has done anything but what a shall would be. But I will tell you, if we're changing this to a shall, I think it has implications to snow days. I think it could be a real slippery slope.
I'm sorry, where in here does it mention snow days? This is in regards to pandemic preparedness.
Correct, but we're changing the recommendation. So if we change the recommendation here, we could easily change the recommendation as it goes to school closures for snow days.
But that's not what we're discussing here.
It's just the beginning of it, though. I mean, we start changing the words in one place. Oftentimes in the past, it's changed in other places. Well, we did it here. We need to do it here.
Well, then, I mean, you could argue that for anything then. I mean, my point is that this was adopted in 2020, December of 2020, like before we endured all of the things we endured in this pandemic. So this was
actually 6 months after, because March of 2020 was the shutdown. So December of 2020 would be.
But endured the longevity of the decisions that were made with shutting down schools, and then what kind of, what's on the back of this, suspending in-person learning, going to remote and or blended remote, all of those things that we endured in the last 2.5 years, right? So that December of 2020 was before we had the longevity of, dealing with the outcomes, the consequences, and the effects of closing our doors, of going to remote learning, of going to complicated blended learning, all of those things. So that's why.
I think, Ben, we have one board member that wants to table it.
Okay. All right. That's the clip. I mean, so here you saw the pushback from board member Donna Kemp, who said, you are the ones going down the slippery slope. This is a pandemic policy, and you are trying to make it sound like we're going to have to do this for snow days. come together as a board and decide. I mean, why this discussion? How hard is it for them not to understand this? They're intentionally misinterpreting her comments, the policy itself. Why?
Tyranny thrives on fear, so we have to create fear to manage and increase control. And so this is all about trying to scare people. And then, okay, you're scared. We have a plan to save you, but you're going to have to give up your freedom at the same time. It's been played over and over and over again, even at the local level. This is going on.
Well, it's frightening. I got to hand it to you, Bill. I mean, it's just frightening. There was another controversial issue that came up, and very quickly, it was about they called it equality in education policy. But yes, embedded in that equality education policy, from my understanding of the back and forth on that, it was really about sex equity, and it was about allowing transgenders into the boys' bathroom. Specifically, I mean, this issue came up as well. This issue was not transparent to everybody. This policy was not well developed, and the school board. There's too long to play the clip, but the superintendent kept saying that the policy is not changing. The policy is not changing. It was inadvertently put into the policy packet. And school board member Donna Kemp comes back and says, well, it's on the agenda, so let's discuss it, whether there's a change or not. Good point. Good point. And that's a policy that I personally believe got slipped in through another board when nobody was paying attention. And now it's rearing its head because we have had so much more attention on that particular policy issue.
Yeah, there was a spat between superintendent and Donna regarding, whether it was ripe to talk about, because it had been in there last time they saw the policies, and I guess they deferred talking about it further with the lawyer. So a lot of the discussion was about, well, if this is a language that stems from some federal requirement, we're going to have a lawyer in here to discuss it with us. So this also ended up being tabled, and I guess they're planning to talk about it again in July, although I don't know exactly the details of how that's going to happen. In the meantime, both of these were tabled until the next period. And I just wanted to add a comment. Mm-hmm. Most of us are probably a little bit surprised at this push for transgender rights. I mean, it wasn't really going on much 5 or 10 years ago. And so it's very prudent to ask. Citizens should ask why. Why now? What is the agenda? Who is pushing this agenda? Why are we trying to imbue transgender rights into virtually everything that's being done in all institutions, to the point that if you're not transgender, maybe you're going to be a second-class citizen? Who's pushing this? And I think it's I have my own thoughts about it, but let's find out who's pushing this thing and why. Why are they pushing transgender rights?
It's a really good question.
It won't be done unless there's a very significant and overriding reason why, and it will affect our lives.
One last comment here. So the sex equity portion of the educational equality policy that they had, the argument was that sex equity dealt with Title IX, and that means fairness for women in sports, which is being upended by transgenders trying to insert themselves into women's sports.
Right.
Well, just today there was an article Betsy DeVos wrote. There was an article out about Betsy DeVos saying Biden plans to radically change Title IX to let biological men play women's sports. So there's policy coming down from the federal government. Now, I personally think in this case, last night's discussion with Emily Tamaru, the superintendent, and her insisting that you need to have legal counsel there when discussing this issue, she was trying to conflate the idea that in our civil rights legislation in the state of Illinois, we've kind of added in sexual orientation into some of our civil rights language. But the argument that the board member, Ms. Kemp, was making was that this is a Title IX issue that deals with protecting women and ensuring they have the opportunity in women's sports. So great, have some legal counsel there, and I'm letting people know that there is, I think, an obfuscation on the part of the superintendent to conflate the two issues when one means one thing, which is Title IX protections for women's sports, and the other one means civil rights issues. And she is intentionally, I think, muddling the issue. So, I mean, that's my reading on it. I could be wrong, but it's great to know, and residents who are listening to this conversation between Bill and I, hopefully you will be paying attention in the subsequent board meetings where these two policies, both the pandemic policy and this policy are discussed in further board meetings. So I want you to stay attuned to that. Any final comments, Bill?
Yeah, and Donna mentioned that basically Title IX, which is a law passed by Congress, but these issues regarding gender equity are from executive orders. As we all know, executive orders can be written, they can be canceled, they can be ignored. They're not actually law passed by Congress and signed by the president. So she pointed that out, and I think that's valid. And the school district, in my view, probably needs to conform to what's legal, what's the law, and they probably need to be careful if they're going to have a strict policy that reflects some executive order, which is transient and doesn't have legal standing, really.
Absolutely. Okay, well, fascinating conversation, Bill. Thank you for being a good citizen, paying attention locally, because that's where the biggest policies that happen affect people.
You're welcome. One last thing.
Yes.
I encourage residents, come to the board meeting, write letters to the board meeting, talk to your friends. We need more people to be engaged in these matters. There'll be more issues coming up that may align better with your interests, so please get involved.
Thank you so much for that conversation.
Thanks.
Okay, back with you shortly. We're going to have Michael LaFiDo. He's a real estate agent. He does a lot of high-end sales, and he's going to come on to talk about the housing market and what's going on. Thanks for joining me on The Real Story with Jeannie Ives. Stay tuned. Welcome back to The Real Story with Jeannie Ives. On the phone with me is Michael LaFiDo. Michael's a real estate consultant and top producing realtor with over 20 years of experience in the real estate industry. His marketing has been the featured covered story in Crain's Chicago Business and highlighted in Forbes and Fox News Chicago Business Hour. He's also the author of the books Luxury Listing Specialist, Outside the Box, and Marketing Luxury. So, Michael, you primarily market to and are a consultant to luxury marketing, luxury real estate. And that is a different, I would say, set of house buying than you typically find most people are able to afford. However, I assume you've got a real pulse on what's going on in the market right now for housing. And I'm welcoming you onto my program because I want to find out as well, as do my listeners, what is going out there. It seems like the wild, wild west when it comes to housing.
Yeah, overall, thanks again for the opportunity. Excited to be on with you. And, overall, we are seeing a cooling a little bit of the market. There's still a shortage of inventory, so that's the good news. If somebody's selling a house today, there's not a lot of competition, but we are seeing days on the market before it goes on the contract are increasing. We're seeing more price reductions, which we didn't see much in 2021, and but overall across the country, things are slowing down a bit, but it's still in most markets it's still overall a seller's market. In some markets, it might be what they call a neutral or balanced market, but many projections are with inflation and gas prices and some downward uncertainty that we might be shifting over to a buyer's market.
Well, that's interesting because considering the uptick in interest rates, and maybe you could give our listeners an idea of how much the mortgage rates have shifted in just the last year. I'm very much interested in that, but I also think that if you sell something and then you may need to buy something, are you really willing to sell in this market if you're looking at a much higher interest rate?
Yeah, that's a great point. So give you some kind of context.
Okay.
A little over a year ago, interest rates were around 3 or just below 3% for a 30-year fixed mortgage, and today they're right at 6%. On my way to O'Hare yesterday, Guaranteed Rate has a big digital interest rate calculator, and they're at 6%. So they've doubled, in the last year. So again, historically speaking, over the last 5 decades, that 6% interest rate is still better on average than 4 out of the last 5 decades. 2010 to 2020 was the only decade where interest rates were on average below that 6%. So historically speaking, it's pretty healthy, but we were spoiled over the last year with rates, over the last few years with rates being, below 4.5, below 4, and last year below 3.
Well,
so that definitely has had a factor.
Oh, go ahead. Okay, that's...
that definitely has a factor, rates going up with some uncertainty a little bit if people really focus on rates versus if they focus on what their monthly payment is.
Well, and of course, rates affect your monthly payments. So do property taxes. So speaking of property taxes, I'm imagining that you have quite a few sellers, and possibly they're moving to states with better tax situations. Are you seeing much of that? We hear about it, right? We hear about the outmigration specifically from Illinois, but do you actually see it in your customer base?
Yeah, unfortunately, we've lost a lot of good families from Illinois. I've lost a lot of good friends and just good people, good citizens for the school district, for the community, people that, had great philanthropic, volunteer, donated time and energy. We've lost a lot of good people from the Chicagoland market, and no different than New Jersey and some of these other high tax areas. There's a multitude of reasons, from property taxes to, not necessarily trusting where the taxes are going for the local municipalities or the state, to crime, schools. Some people don't like, the state of some of the public schools or the pension system. I was a former teacher, and, for years they weren't feeding into that pension. So there's just a lot of reasons. Obviously, I've stayed. I love the state, and I'm disappointed to see Caterpillar's headquarters being moved to Texas, and it's really frustrating that we had more. Seems like people leaving based on U-Haul and some of these surveys than coming into the state.
Well, I'll tell you what. My son just got married, and he and his new wife are headed to Houston for his first job coming out of getting an MBA at University of Chicago Booth School of Management. So they're headed to Houston. They bought a house. I thought it was at the higher end of the market, honestly. And they needed to rent a U-Haul. Well, to go to Houston to rent a U-Haul was about $1,200. To go from Houston to Chicago area was only $250. So it does cost quite a bit more to leave the state, because a lot more people are doing that than doing the reverse commute. So I found that a little bit interesting. It's still unfortunate. But back to Caterpillar headquarters moving out. So, I'm sure that a lot of those CEOs have high-end homes. Hopefully you'll get a bite at the apple there.
Yeah, the C-level executives definitely have the upper price point in homes, but it's a shame. I had somebody post on one of my social media posts like, oh, well, it's not thousands of employees, it's only, the key executives, but that's not the point, right? The point is we have Texans I know are welcoming at Caterpillar headquarters, and it's, that's just one example, but unfortunately, we are seeing a lot of that in the Chicagoland market. We saw the great migration from over the last 2 years from people leaving the city to the suburbs, right? The suburban luxury real estate market in Chicagoland was the healthiest ever been. And now I was just talking to a real estate agent. I'm at a real estate conference as we're talking right now, and he focuses in the city, and he said, man, rent prices are up 25% in the city, because most people are renting in the city, the younger generation. But I think you're going to see condos continue to decrease in Chicago. I was talking to a gentleman that owned 3 condos in a certain building. He lived there years ago, and he owned 3 of them. He paid $420 for one, and sold for $305, and he owned it for 22 years, something like that, and he lost money.
Jeez.
Markets like Houston, markets, in in Tennessee and Texas and Florida and Carolinas and Arizona. They're seeing appreciation like never before, and this guy sold for a huge loss after 20 years.
Yeah, well, I mean, speaking of Caterpillar, I mean, let's face it, it's a $5 billion company, revenues in 2021. Its history is here in Illinois, and when you lose a behemoth like that to another state, I don't care if it's just the corporate headquarters, it says something about the state, and that's shameful that people would just disregard that. It's a huge statement that they're making by moving out of the state of Illinois, which is a great state, by the way. It's just bogged down by its really bad political nature. Hey, listen, I only have a few minutes with you, so let's move on to a couple things. One, I want to know, where are the hot markets? Yeah. Is Houston a hot market? I mean, my son had a hell of a time trying to purchase a house, kept getting outbidded. Couldn't even, find anything really. Always had to, actually, for quite a few bids, they were definitely going over the bid price or the asking price. So where are the hot markets right now?
Hot markets still tend to be tax-friendly states, right? I mean, Illinois has property taxes that are really high, and we have state income tax. So, I believe there's 9 states that don't have state income tax, so those are always desirable. So your Carolina, your Tennessee, your Florida, your Georgia, you're seeing Alabama. You're seeing Alabama increase population, particularly, south part. So tends to be warmer climates, more tax-friendly, and tax-friendly not just property taxes, but also state income tax.
Okay, great. So for sellers who are contemplating, putting their house on the market, what are the top 3 upgrades that they could do or things that they should do in order to sell their house quickly and give it its best look without breaking the bank? What do you recommend?
Yeah, there's things you can do on a Yeah, absolutely. There's things you can do on a shoestring budget. Number 1 is curb appeal. Curb appeal is key, no matter if it's a hot market or not, to get top dollar. So by curb appeal, first impressions, right? Landscaping, trimming things back, light power washings in the Midwest. From the month of November to March, you probably can't have outside spigot, so make sure you do some power washing, no moss, no discoloration. Paint, so that's number 1, curb appeal. Number 2 is paint on the inside, paint on the outside. You get a great ROI with paint. And number 3 would be depersonalization could be like window treatments and bedding, for example. Most people's window treatments and bedding are very decorative to their style, so sometimes less is more. So think of earth tones, whites, off-whites, versus bold colors. Bold colors are personalized. So even though you love your maroon walls, maroon or greens or blues, those are personalized. So you want to position your home that most buyers can visually move in, because most buyers don't have that ability to visualize. They only know what they see, so less is more.
So I should get rid of my Wheaton-Warrenville South tiger orange wall?
Yeah, it's a little personalized, although, south side of Wheaton, I used to say if you wanted to win a championship, send them to the south side of Wheaton, but of course Wheaton North won state this year,
yes,
so I can't even say that anymore.
Yeah, congratulations to Wheaton North, that's right.
That's great for the town.
Yeah, no, my kids played football at South, so did you played, I believe, right? So, it's good stuff. All right, well, great. I mean, I thank you for coming on the program. We just had a few minutes with you, but I really wanted this update, and we'll continue to do some more. Good luck to you in your business. Hopefully Illinois will make a change here and turn things around and start to attract people rather than repel them. So that is always our goal. I'm here still, too.
Listen, it's a great state, and what I tell people is life ultimately is what drives real estate, right? Somebody's getting married, i.e. your son, somebody's relocating, somebody's a move-up buyer, someone's downsizing, fortunately somebody's getting divorced, and that's what drives real estate. Although there are things that can influence real estate, i.e. interest rates, taxes, what's going on in Ukraine, and uncertainty. Consumer confidence does negatively or positively affect real estate, but life ultimately is what drives real estate.
That's really good insight. That's a really good point. Again, Michael LaFiDo, thank you so much for joining us on The Real Story with Jeannie Ives. Welcome back to The Real Story with Jeannie Ives. In studio with me is John Morrissey. John and I have been working for a couple years now, well, we're going on year 2, looking at the election database in DuPage County. There's a lot of reasons for that, which I'm going to get into, but I just want to let people know, first of all, you know, however you feel about the election of 2020, whether you think it was stolen, whether you think there was fraud, whatever, it's still important to vote. It is very important to vote. I just voted today. Maybe you can see my sticker. And I took my 2 young kids with me. And in fact, my youngest just turned 18 in March, so she was able to vote for the very first time. We did use one of those provisions that, you know, maybe people aren't comfortable with, but we did same-day register, same-day vote with her. And it worked flawlessly at the DuPage County Fairgrounds. So the point in saying this is that I encourage you to vote. More than anything, I encourage you to vote in person because there's nothing more gratifying than to fill out your ballot and watch it go into the tabulator. And so I know that in DuPage County, we've gone to all paper ballots for this election cycle. That's not how it was, though, in the election of 2020. And in fact, DuPage County specifically had a lot of problems, in my opinion, and in John's, with their election. One of the most glaring problems that we came across in our investigative work, and we've been doing this now for 18 months, literally since the 2020 election, we've started to look into it. Why did we start to look into it? Because after the election and the votes were counted, according to the DuPage County clerk and her official numbers, and those numbers that were then given to the state and rolled up to the state level, there are still 1,600 more ballots that were cast in DuPage County than the DuPage County clerk has voters who voted. 1,600 ballots have no name to them is what I'm saying. No name. Now,
That's
John,
correct.
It's fundamental that for the day of election, we should know every single person who voted in that election. How else are we to verify whether or not those were legal votes that were taken?
Absolutely. And I think we do. I think we've been told in this jurisdiction and by our clerk, Kaczmarek, or through one of her managers, that we have a live database, and we can't trace that because every day they're moving people in and out of the database. Well,
so that was their excuse. Let's be clear here.
Right.
Their excuse was that the database for voters is fluid. Which means that on any given day, you have voters that are being taken off the voter rolls and voters that are being added to the voter rolls. Right. So even post-election, because of the fluidity of the voter database, they cannot tell us definitively who was in DuPage County, was an actual resident of DuPage County, and legally voted in DuPage County. They cannot give us that complete list. That is what they're saying.
That is what they're saying.
We don't quite believe that.
They said it in an affidavit, by the way.
Let's get to that point. They said this in an affidavit. I'm going to set it up, and then I want to hear from you about the affidavit. So the setup here is that Bob Grogan, the Republican, lost the DuPage County auditor's race by 75 votes. Subsequently to that, he challenged the election result and pursued a lawsuit in order to get to the bottom of this, because of the fact that you had 1,600 more voters than ballots that were cast. And in doing so, in that lawsuit, there was an affidavit that was given by who, and what did it say?
It was given by Stephanie Groenwald.
And
she's an employee of the election division. I think she's a manager, maybe vote by mail registration or vote by mail process.
Okay.
I'm not clear, but she's a longtime employee of the organization.
Okay. And as part of this lawsuit, she provided an affidavit to whether or not they have a full voter data list. And what did she say?
Well, this is, I think, because of an affidavit coming from her and her representatives, it looks like it was a preemptive, I just guess, a preemptive answer to what Bob was going to ask, or Bob Grogan was going to ask. And she claims that what you said, this is a live database, it's dynamic, as oftentimes explained, that there is no one data looks like the next database, and they don't have the system to retrieve that data. And actually, I think they do, because they bought systems that looked the same month, the same year, the same election, which was in October of 2020, that the state of California and the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania bought for their statewide elections, and it's called Knowing, and it's a poll book. The poll book has the information.
Okay, so let's square a few circles here for people. Let's connect some dots. So the DuPage County Election Commission purchases a poll book, an electronic poll book called Knowing. It is the same system that both California and Pennsylvania have.
Yes.
And both California and Pennsylvania, according to reports, they say that Knowing poll book, electronic poll book system, that captures your signature when you're signing in to receive your ballot, that poll system, that electronic poll book, gives you a report. It has a reporting function in it.
Exactly. One of the features is the downloadable, and they asked for it. The respective heads of both these election commissions, or whatever they're called, asked for a reportable feature in this, and they got it on. They want to know who actually votes, as opposed to ballots.
So there is a way to capture exactly who voted in that election, and it's not maybe held in the voter database system,
right?
But it's held in this electronic poll book system, which actually squares up another thing that occurred, because one of the first things we did when we looked at the 2020 election, we looked at the voter databases, we sorted by age, and there were, well over 100 people that were over the age of 100, and in fact, there were 3 people that were ages 121, 119, and 119. And we said at that time, those 3 people would literally be the oldest people in the world, and they all reside in DuPage County, and they all voted in 2020. I mean, it's an impossibility. So we kind of went around and around with the state's attorney. Their answer back from when they queried the clerk on this was that, well, they didn't really vote. We have a second set of records. Possibly this Knowing database is the second set of records.
I really think it
have.
is. I really
and
think
so
it
they
is.
kind of tipped their hands.
Right.
That said, we found another man who was dead and still voted in 2020, even though he died in 2018. And there has been no refutation the fact that he got counted also, other than to say, well, he's not in our second set of database. Well, then why is he marked in the voter database as having voted? So that goes on and on. Now, what we're trying to get to here is we want the ballots that were cast to match the number of voters who voted. And we want, literally, we should have a direct match.
Well, these systems are very good at capturing ballots cast. I mean, it's an electronic input. A person is not, but a ballot becomes an electronic signal or whatever, a dot of data, and now that's what they work off of.
Right.
That bit of data.
We should be using technology to our advantage here to understand this. Now, another problem that came up when we were looking at this, and a problem that is still exists in existence right now, is the fact that the voter data rolls are very dirty, meaning that there's a lot of people that should be excluded from the data, the rolls that are still on the rolls. And in fact, I think back then we had we had something like 35,000 voters who basically had moved out of the state. I think that was before. Now we pulled another list. By the way, part of what we did is we had the list from December 3rd of 2020 that we received from the Election Commission via the DuPage County Republican chairperson. That was supposed to be the definitive list of the voters who voted in 2020, in November 3rd of 2020, because we asked for it. Then we pulled the voter list on December 20th of 2020. Then we pulled a voter list on June 1st of 2020. We've pulled another one, I believe, on August 17th of 2021. August 17th of 2021. We just pulled one again on April 11th of 2022. And then in a couple of cases, we matched them against the National Change of Address list, which tells you that voters changed their address.
Right.
And in doing that, we found thousands of voters that have changed their address, and yet they have requested a vote-by-mail ballot using their old address.
What we think is their old address.
Yes. So go into that a little bit.
Well, a
because there
PO
could be a number of reasons.
They changed their address to a PO box.
Some did.
And there's several. There's 1,800 changes to PO box in DuPage County. Well,
okay,
PO
you're
box,
talking for this year, for
this year,
2022,
right now,
when we took the April 11 voter list and measured it against the brand new national change of address list. You have 1,800 people who actually literally changed their mailing address to a PO box.
Correct.
So they can have a PO box for mailing purposes.
Right.
You cannot have a PO box to declare residency for voting purposes.
And we have a FOIA in, and it should be responded to very shortly to see where they sent those ballots to. A PO box could be a legitimate. You want all your business going to a PO box.
Yeah, that could be legit.
That's all right. Now the local precinct committeeman, he's not an investigator, but he is an elected official, and he would have the duty or the responsibility or the right to go knock on the door and see if Mr. and Mrs. Smith still live at the address that they received the ballot, because I wouldn't think the county would send it to a PO box. But we don't know that because they don't tell us that. And number two is we have to get a list. We have to know who they send all the ballots to all the time, especially now, when ballots aren't secret to the extent they once were.
That is definitely true. So, so looking forward here, we also have information that we think at least 4 dozen people about have requested vote by mail ballots from addresses, and yet they have moved out of this county.
Yes, we have, I think, counting the P.O. boxes, we have, and this was early last week, maybe 44 people, 42 people who have requested ballots that don't have what we think is a valid address. But, one of the persons changed their address to St. Petersburg, Florida. That may be fine. That may be a winter home. They can come back.
That's right.
A P.O. box, maybe you were going to move and you want all your before you move, you want all your mail going to the P.O. box. But
that could be legit.
Yeah, all that's legit. I mean, we're not questioning anybody's Bible. We want to look at this process because it's very complex now. We got 600,000 people that have a right to vote here, which is about double what it was 5 years ago. And voting is a crucial, very crucial thing from the presidency on down to the auditor that we get the right count, period.
Yes. So I think a lot of the issues do revolve around this idea of residency, and you have to have lived in the area that you're voting from, the address that you're voting from, for 30 days prior to the election. So I think that there's a lot of fudging going around on residency issues. There's reasons, though. Obviously, if you're in the military, you can declare your residency where you want to and vote from wherever you want to.
We excluded all the FPOs and APO
we obviously did that as well. So I think more of our concern, though, is this idea that we don't actually know everybody who's voting.
And I don't think, it's just a hunch, I don't think, the election division does not know how to use that software to download that information. I'm not surprised they don't know. It's not a big deal, but they're still using Office 95, 3000 sometimes for their Excel spreadsheets, and that's okay. However, it's not what everybody else is doing. So I don't know what they don't know or what they do know, but it's we can discuss the unique ID thing later.
So let's talk about that in a minute, but there's a lot of confusion in the database because sometimes when you register, you may get you may register through a state facility.
Right.
Sometimes when you register, you may register locally speaking. Those things need to come together.
Right.
In many cases, we find that people have multiple state IDs that adds to the confusion. In some cases, you have people that maybe re-register and they get an additional state ID even though they're the same person, so they don't carry that state ID over from one registration to another. It just makes for a very complicated process. And our intent, actually, in doing some of this investigation is to provide some confidence in the process.
Right.
And right now, when you can't even tell us everybody who voted in an election, there's not a whole lot of confidence that you're taking care of all the other details surrounding proper voting.
Producing ballots, I think, is important, but you also have to have a name behind that and an address.
Well, you know, and let's do that one example. We've brought it up before in a previous podcast, but I think it's important to review it. Give us that one example. When we were doing the investigation work in 2021, you went to a home.
Yes.
In
Elmhurst.
Yes. Go ahead and tell this example to our listening audience because it illustrates the problems going on.
I went to this home in Elmhurst, not too far from where I live and familiar with. Nice home. And I asked the person, who I believe the resident, to live there.
Well, first of all, why did you show up at that home?
Well, because we had two different people registered there, and one showed that they moved for the NCOA. And just by the way, the NCOA customer number, which is the post office operation, is the same as our state voting number. So that helps us out. And I think that's probably true throughout the United States. I don't know for sure. So I go there and I said, well, did Mrs. So-and-so live here in November last year and vote? And the person who answered the door says, I was an election judge, and no, she didn't. I lived here. However, she did vote. She came in our precinct and made an announcement that she was going to vote from this address. I didn't know what to do. And so she went ahead and voted. Now, subsequent to that time, I haven't told you, she changed her voting address, got all squared away by February 2022. However, at that time, it wasn't. So
she knew that she voted illegally.
Right. And
so the old resident, the woman, goes to her old polling place where the new person who bought the house from her is the election judge.
Exactly.
And she says, well, I'm going to vote using my old address, which the election judge now lives at that address. And the election judge just says, I didn't know what to do. I mean, so that's improper training.
Right.
Which
is not unusual.
Which is not unusual, but that's improper training. It's a lack of courage on the election judge to stand up to the very woman whose house she bought from and said, you can't, you moved, you don't live here, you can't use that address anymore. And so now, maybe she heard about what we were looking into. Maybe she changed her.
Oh, I'm sure.
Absolutely, the result of our reporting.
Absolutely. And ironically,
led the woman to change her.
A male
voting.
And a younger person live at the address that she now signed on to, and they both voted in 2020. So I don't know what their relationship is, other than they all have the same last name. So they're related, maybe. But she has corrected that. But I found a lot of that. Well, my brother lived here a couple of years ago. Well, your brother just voted from here, or somebody voted from this address. And these are Elmhurst single-family homes, which are pretty easy to identify. And, I mean, there's issues of children moving away and all sorts of things. I mean, if we can't get all the facts, which means we can't see who ballots are sent to and who received ballots, will never know who voted legally. We can canvass and count, and our clerks will say, well, we got all 491,000 of them. Well, that's 491,000 pieces of paper.
Well, honestly, so this is where actually being a precinct committeeman really is valuable, because you should know your neighborhood the best. You have the authority to go in and knock on doors and find out who lives at that household, to find out if there was improper votes cast and whether or not that's really true. Because the other thing that we found alarming in the 2020 election, there were tens of thousands of people who hadn't voted in the previous 10 years and then all of a sudden showed up to vote in November of 2020. It seems really odd. It seems really strange. There were a lot of controversial elections over that last 10 years. And so that's where you can invite fraud. That's where it has been allegated. That's the allegations. For example, in the infamous 2000 Mules movie that came out, the allegations is that people who don't vote but are on the voter roll, their name is ripe for being taken and an improper vote being made on their behalf, which is why the only way that you ferret this out is a physical a physical visit to the home to determine who lived there at the time of proper voting and who, and whether or not that's accurate. So that's the work of a committeeman. That's the value of a committeeman to kind of ferret that out. So going forward, let's just wrap this up a little bit. Well, what do you expect for this next election? What more do you want to tell people that are listening to this broadcast?
Well, right now, we all want the repeat of 2020, and we're heading that way right now. As you can believe, the 491,000 people had 491,000 unique county voter IDs. You voted today with your family. If any of them had not been registered, and this is the first time they voted, they would not have gotten a state ID, but they would have got a county ID. And these IDs are unique to the voter. Or I would understand. I mean, that's how you manage a database, is having unique markers. I have found now, using the databases post the election, that there are an additional 1,123, I believe, unique IDs that voted in the election of 2020, which aren't part of the 191,000 that voted, that the clerk has said.
You mean 491,000?
491,000, yes. So it's a small percent. It's not a lot.
So what are you saying though? Those additional unique IDs are you saying one person has two IDs?
Yes, only one is active and only one is valid now. But something is not working right in the election division office when you have software that apparently isn't used to its full capacity. They double their budget from $3 million to over $6 million in 4 years. They purchase and they advocate and lobby very hard to get these systems in. But yet, when we come out with unbalanced numbers and unique IDs that are just people with multiple unique IDs, or at least two, it's odd. It just doesn't give you confidence in this election.
That's for sure. We're going to leave it there.
Okay.
Thank you so much, John. We will be updating our audience on what we find post-primary election as we get ready for the general election. Again, I encourage everybody out there to either become a poll watcher or become an election judge. Do your part, learn the system, be watchful, and let's make sure that we can all have confidence in our elections going forward, because we certainly don't want a rerun of the aftermath of 2020. We want to know what we know, and we want the decision made, almost immediately. We want to know that we have elected who the majority of the people feel is going to represent us best. And so with that, signing off on this podcast. Thank you so much for joining me on The Real Story with Jeannie Ives. It's been one of those long primary seasons in the state of Illinois. Typically, we vote in the primary in March, but because of the census numbers being late and the finagling of the maps that had to happen so the Democrats could draw the districts the way that they wanted them drawn, well, that means that the primary really didn't get started until January, and the kickoff to that was getting petitions. So now we're in this phase where we have a very, very short general election, only 4 months between the June 28th primary date and really November 8th of 2022 when you're going to vote in the general election. Now, this was all planned by the Democrats, by the way. They like it this way. They watched Republicans beat each other up for, week after week, ad after ad, mail piece after mail piece. It's been really messy out there. After this election, though, Republicans need to come together, and they need to get behind the nominee, because we need to beat Pritzker and his Democrats in November of 2022. I mean, this state deserves conservative reform like we have seen our other states go through. Scott Walker in Wisconsin turning back the union control. Iowa moving from a progressive income tax to a flat tax that is lower than Illinois' flat tax. Missouri with the second lowest gas taxes instead of the second highest gas taxes like we have in Illinois. Indiana, a 1% residential property tax cap. Meanwhile, Illinois, the neighbor next door, with the second highest property taxes in the state. listen, I mean, if you don't want to live this way any longer, if you don't want to stop looking at Zillow for other places to maybe take up residency after you've retired or after your youngest is out of school, then it's time to start the fight here. Start the fight in the state of Illinois. We're still a Midwestern state with conservative values, in my opinion. I think that most people feel that way. It's just that you've been lied to by the politicians for so long that you really don't know who to believe. Well, time to get involved, time to get informed. Hopefully you listen to this podcast and other people to get your information that's real and true. That's why I call it The Real Story with Jeannie Ives. I put real people in front of you so you can learn the truth about politicians, policies, and the politics behind that. Because there's nothing more important than being an informed voter. Listen, Citizenry is not a spectator sport, so you need to get involved at the local level and start to push back against these progressive, horrible policies that have decimated our state and are destroying our kids' livelihoods and lives as we speak. So thank you for listening to my podcast for, now the 101st episode that we've had. But more importantly, get involved locally and find out what's going on. Thank you so much.